Hey, welcome to My Mama Summer. My name is Aimee Devlin. I'm an unconventional millennial mother living abroad, building a business and raising children while stepping into who she's meant to be. This podcast is an audio version of my newsletter, which you can find at mymamasummer.com. The episodes are short, wholehearted reflections of my life as a mother, business owner, and everyday human committed to being the best she can be. Pop in your headphones, grab a cuppa and a cookie, and take this time to just be with me. Hey there, and welcome back to My Mama Summer. I'm Aimee, and today I'm kicking off something really close to my heart. And it's a multi-part series called Reclaiming Beauty. This first part, part one, is called Reclaiming Beauty, Breaking the Spell of Generational Shame. And this series isn't just about beauty in the way we've been taught to see it. It's about how beauty has been tangled up with judgment, shame, self-worth, and the generations of programming we've inherited without even realizing it. For years, I sidelined beauty, not just my own, but the very idea that beauty for beauty's sake could be something valid, important, or even necessary. My mind was hijacked by judgment, overwhelm, and the feeling that I always had to be doing something more productive. I told myself beauty was superficial. But as I've pulled on this thread, I've realized it runs so much deeper than I ever imagined. In this series, I'm going to take you along as I unravel how generational shame has shaped my relationship with beauty, the voice of self-criticism and how to replace it with self-compassion. I'm still working on that one. The masculine hustle culture that kept me disconnected from my feminine essence, the judgments I've internalized about myself and others, and how they keep us all small, and how I'm reclaiming beauty, not just externally, but as a way of being. This journey has taken me through astrology, tarot, psychology, digital minimalism, feminine polarity, and even my personal battle with work addiction. I've learned from the likes of Kristin Neff, Michael Tsarian, Alison Armstrong, Zach Rody, Cal Newport, Lindsay Gibson, Alison Bornstein, and many others, and I'll be sharing all of it with you. So if you've ever felt disconnected from your own beauty, if you've ever judged yourself harshly for how you look or don't look, or others for the same, if you've ever felt like you don't quite fit, this series is for you. It's about breaking the spell of generational shame, rewriting the stories we tell ourselves, and ultimately reclaiming beauty on our own terms. I can't wait to take this journey with you. Reclaiming Beauty starts now. I've been pulling on a thread for a while now, and that thread is beauty. I have a complex relationship with beauty. Not in a million years would I have thought that my uncomfortable feelings about clothing, style, makeup, and being seen and adored were related to the thread I'm about to explore with you. But looking back, I see it. In pulling on this thread, I realized once again that self-reflection is the most important work we can do, and we have no idea where or how powerfully it will lead us. It all started with an astrological tarot reading. I booked this appointment because I felt like a lost little lamb. I was constantly struggling against the grain and felt like I had zero idea who I was, what I wanted, or where I was going. I felt like I'd woken up in someone else's life and was trying to work out the next step. And having a child often does that to you. The tarot cards, combined with the stars, pinpointed my lack of self-compassion as the roadblock of all roadblocks in my life. Now, I pride myself on being an outwardly kind and compassionate human, but the judgments about myself in my head, if I were to voice them out loud, you might grab a straitjacket and bundle me up for a little drive to the closest asylum. You might even think they were from Lucifer himself. How do I know this? Well, over the years, I've voiced some of these comments aloud, and the way my husband looks at me tells me everything I need to know about how true they are and how strong my programming is. Or should I say, was. At times, I've stared blankly back and asked him outright, "Don't you believe that?" And he'll respond in a way that lets me know he most certainly does not. When I realized this and inquired into these thoughts, I knew they were off base, but that didn't stop them from ruling my life, crushing my self worth, and ultimately grinding my business to a halt because judgment, imposter syndrome, and paralysis told me who was I to X, Y, or Z. After this very revealing reading, my tarot reader, also an astrologer, transpersonal psychologist, Taoist, and my close friend Francis prescribed daily self compassion meditation and being much kinder to myself. I started reading Kristin Neff's work on self compassion and exploring why I was compassionate to others and contemptuous towards myself. Neff's book, Self Compassion: The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself, taught me that if you are continually judging and criticizing yourself while trying to be kind to others, you are drawing artificial boundaries and distinctions that only lead to feelings of separation and isolation. Neff says this is the opposite of oneness, interconnection, and universal love, the ultimate goal of most spiritual paths, no matter which tradition. And after reading this, finally I started to take notice. I hadn't realized that by loathing myself, I wasn't just hurting myself, I was hurting others too. But when I did realize this, it was my catalyst for change. I wanted to know, how did I cultivate such a nasty inner voice? When I read Neff saying, and I quote, "The disparaging running commentary they hear inside their own head is often a reflection of parental voices, sometimes passed down and replicated throughout generations." That was my next crumb on Hansel and Gretel's path to self-love. Realizing that the critical voices in my mind weren't truly mine was a big wake-up call. I began to unmask their personalities, and inside I found my Nan and her daughter, my mother, living in my mind, sharing their thoughts about me, with me, as I grew up. It was overwhelmingly them who I heard when I looked in the mirror to criticize myself. And as I pulled on this thread of self-contempt, and I say that because it was much more than a lack of self-compassion, I sat up in bed at night devouring books to help me understand how to extricate them from my head. This was and continues to be one of the most profound yet shameful periods of my life. I found myself paralyzed in a paradox. I felt immense guilt, even picking up a book that hinted that my parents may have flaws. Because raising children is hard, and I knew they did their very best. And I also know their parents had flaws too, as did their parents and theirs. I ruminated on, but it's not their fault, versus, but I need to shift this programming for months, years even. But as Michael Tsarian says in his brilliant book, Dragon Mother, and that's another title that invoked more shame, personal trauma derives from parents who probably experienced trauma from their parents who were also traumatized by theirs. This vicious cycle of pain, grief, anger, and defilement has a very long etiology. This is why the problem of present personal trauma cannot be considered independently of ancient collective trauma. I had many late night emotional conversations with Brendan about the guilt and shame I felt in working with this issue. Because in our society, a woman's relationship with her mother is a sacred cow. It's off limits and not supposed to be questioned. But I had to go there and heal it somehow. I set out and continue to look at my experience from a daughter's perspective rather than demonize my mother's actions or experiences. And exploring this openly in a public environment, like I am right now, amplified my fear. But I felt if I could help even just one woman feel like she wasn't alone, that it was necessary to do so. Katherine Fabrizio helped me realize that feeling guilty doesn't necessarily make you guilty. She says that shame thrives in secrecy, but heals when it is brought into the light of day. Where there's no more secret, shame dissolves. Finding a community of others who are struggling with the same thing, whatever it may be, normalizes the struggle, helping to lift the stigma. And when shame is countered with witnessing, validation, and empathy, it cannot survive. Which is why I'm sharing this with you. Alongside authors Lindsay Gibson, Karen C.L. Anderson, Kelly McDaniel, and Ramani Durvasula, Katherine was instrumental in helping me pull on the deepest program I've ever unwound. The truth is that I'd built my life on a foundation of lies and untruths, and I had to decide whether to build up the house of cards or bravely knock it down. So I found myself at a crossroads with two choices. The first was to keep loathing myself, to remain loyal to my parents and their generational line, or number two, address this programming and choose to live my life. I chose option two, and I can't express how hard it continues to be to choose to live my life. The more I chip away at the programming that haunts me, the more guilt and shame I unravel. All my life, I've been so motivated to walk on eggshells and take care of my mum that many times I didn't even consider whether I wanted to do something. Every decision was about whether or not I should. She has done the same with her mother. Somewhere along the line, we both made an unconscious agreement that we were responsible for our mother's emotional needs, but we are meant to stand separate, whole, on our 2 feet. I was 39 years old when I realized my life was mine to live. That reality was shocking for me to process. It might sound crazy to you that I didn't realize that, as it was for my husband, who was astounded that I didn't realize my life was my own. And even still, it's not easy to stop betraying myself by putting her needs before mine. I'm still racked with guilty thoughts. I constantly remind myself with love, I may feel guilt, but I'm not guilty. Katherine reminds me, you only know life with mum in it, so you don't fully trust that life will go on if you live more independently. And that leads to the crazy part. Since your relationship has been defined by your constant struggle to make mum okay, you may, at the unconscious level, feel responsible for keeping your mother alive. And this explains why I have these crazy thoughts like, what if she dies? And it's my fault. I could never forgive myself. But even in this, I'm not alone. Katherine says that underneath every good daughter's reluctance to change her relationship with her mother, whether she's struggling to stand up for herself, cut off contact, or simply tell her mother something she knows mum isn't going to like, is one terrifying question. What if I fill in the blank and my mother dies? Now, as I was writing this, I took a lunch break and I met my husband in the kitchen, and I shared with him what I'm writing about and my deepest fear in doing so, which was what I just shared with you. And he once again looked at me in that way, with disbelief from his clear, mother wound free place, and said, of course it wouldn't be your fault. While most people go through this process of becoming and separating in their late teens or early 20s, extracting myself to become a human who is independent of her mother is the hardest hurdle I've faced. But as Katherine Fabrizio says, when you are willing to face the short-term pain of disappointing your mother and asserting what you want or don't want, you set the stage to make long-term change. And here's a quote that explains so perfectly what I have experienced. She says, you've spent much of your life so far with one foot in the camp of growing up and the other in the camp of taking care of mum. In this way, you've been attempting to respond to two sets of competing needs. You've worked diligently, walking a fine line to avoid feeling guilty while still attempting to have a life, just one that won't threaten mum. To walk this fine line, you may have resorted to doing things behind her back, hiding things from her, or lying to spare her feelings, which of course made you feel awful. Trapped, boxed in, choosing the lesser of two evils, you felt and may still feel responsible for mum's happiness. And when diving into my psyche and reprogramming my beliefs, I needed to infuse my being with different approaches, ideas, and methods to help me understand why. Why did I feel so lost? Why did I loathe myself? Why did I feel so impotent in my life? And Kelly McDaniel was pivotal in diffusing the shame I felt and having me understand where my lack of self-compassion stems from. She warned me that even in picking up and reading her book, Mother Hunger, that I may vacillate between feeling angry with my mother and feeling like I'm betraying her. She says, as a child, if essential elements of maternal nurturance and protection were missing, you didn't stop loving your mother, you simply didn't learn to love yourself. And this is the place where I found myself, in a place where I couldn't fully live my own life for fear of hurting my mum. And at the same time, I was also in a place where I seemed to hurt her no matter what I did or said. It was a constant state of guilt. And it was Katherine Fabrizio who told me that escaping the guilt trap means knowing with certainty that you can care about your mother without taking on her emotions as if they were your own. Full stop. So these are the seas that I've been navigating. They're choppy, filled with sharks and deep, dark water with no end. And you might be saying to yourself, well, how on earth does this all relate back to beauty? Well, without the context I now have, I might have said the same thing. But this podcast is getting a little longer than I'd planned. So next week in part 2, I'm going to share with you how diving into my self-loathing and my mother wound compelled me to pull on the next thread I pulled on, which was my acceptance and later rejection of living an overwhelmed, overworked, and underjoyed life. My commitment to exploring the uncomfortable continues to reward me by making my life richer. And I'm glad you're alongside me, diving into the deep waters of guilt, shame, and programming that holds so many of us back. I want to leave you with a quote once again by Michael Tsarian, and he says, "We are each eternal mothers and fathers bearing scars of the past, but also the means of healing them." And with that, tune in next week to learn how continuing to pull on this thread has helped me move past loathing and towards acceptance and ultimately beauty in many areas of my life. If you enjoyed this episode and like reading as much as you do listening, I would love to welcome you as another subscriber to my newsletter. Head on over to mymamasummer.com to subscribe and let me know what you loved most about this episode. I love hearing your feedback. It's my favorite part of sharing what's on my heart. I'll see you over there. Have a beautiful day.